I had imagined this day for months, maybe even years, long before Emily was even a flutter in my belly. I pictured the laughter, the delicate clinking of glasses filled with sparkling cider, the rustle of gift bags with pastel bows, and the voices of my friends and family filling the house with warmth. The living room was a soft sea of balloons and ribbons, the scent of vanilla cupcakes floating from the kitchen. Every detail was perfect, every corner whispering anticipation. I stood there in a dress that barely fit over my round stomach, stroking the curve of life inside me, waiting for the doorbell to ring. But the only sound that reached me was the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. The first 30 minutes passed in nervous excitement. I told myself they were running late, that traffic was heavy, that maybe someone had spilled something on their clothes and had to change. I adjusted the plates of food, checked the music playlist again, fixed a ribbon that was already curling at the edges. I even rehearsed how I would hug my mother when she walked in, pretending she hadn't forgotten all the other moments in my life. Each passing second, I clung to hope like a desperate child clutching a torn toy. But as the hours stretched, that hope began to bleed into something darker. The silence became suffocating. I tried calling David, but his phone went straight to voicemail. I scrolled through my messages. Not a single notification, no apologies, no explanations, just emptiness. The house that I had decorated with dreams felt hollow, like a stage set abandoned before the play could begin. I sank onto the couch, my hand on my belly, whispering to Emily that maybe everyone was just stuck somewhere, that soon they would appear with smiles and excuses. My words trembled with the thinness of lies, even as I tried to comfort the little life growing inside me. After 2 hours, I could no longer lie to myself. Nobody was coming. Not my mother, Patricia, who had promised to bring her famous lemon pie. Not my in-laws, who had sworn they were so excited for their first grandchild. Not even Melissa, my sister-in-law, whose presence I had dreaded but had still expected out of courtesy. The truth was cruel. They had all chosen to gather elsewhere, planning every detail of Melissa's wedding. A wedding that was still months away had outweighed the arrival of a new life. My heart cracked under the weight of that realization. Tears blurred my vision as I looked at the untouched cake, the streamers sagging in silent mockery. I had spent hours imagining the joy of unwrapping baby clothes, of holding tiny socks and soft blankets given with love. Instead, I was left holding loneliness, a gift no one asked for, but everyone seemed willing to give me. The humiliation burned deep, because the absence wasn't an accident. It was a choice. They had decided that my baby, my celebration, my existence, didn't matter enough. That sting cut deeper than any insult. I walked into the kitchen, where trays of food waited for mouths that would never taste them. I picked up one of the cupcakes, its pastel pink frosting now seeming almost ridiculous, and bit into it with fury rather than joy. The sweetness turned bitter in my mouth, mixing with the salt of my tears. I leaned against the counter, pressing both hands against my swollen belly, whispering that Emily was worth it all, even if nobody else could see it. She shifted inside me, as if answering back, reminding me that I wasn't completely alone. Her tiny movements were the only applause in the silence of my failed celebration. Hours later, when the sun began to sink and the shadows lengthened across the room, I blew out the candles I had lit in anticipation of company. The flame died with a hiss, leaving behind only smoke and the sour smell of disappointment. I sat back on the couch, exhausted, drained and humiliated. I couldn't stop wondering what it was about me that made me so easy to forget, so easy to overlook. The question gnawed at me like a wound that wouldn't close, reopening again and again with every beat of my heart. When David finally walked through the door, hours after the day had died, his face carried the glow of someone who had been surrounded by laughter, wine, and family. He looked at the decorations, at the uneaten food, and for a moment, guilt flickered in his eyes. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by indifference. "Sorry, Jen," he muttered, tossing his keys on the table. "Things got busy with Melissa." That single sentence was enough to crush the last fragile piece of hope I had saved. My husband hadn't just forgotten, he had chosen too. That night, after cleaning everything alone, I crawled into bed beside David, who had already fallen asleep. His breathing was steady, unbothered, while mine was shallow, torn by silent sobs. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, feeling the baby kick inside me. I pressed my hand over my belly and made a vow in the silence. I will never let you feel the emptiness I felt today. The promise was both a prayer and a rebellion, born out of betrayal, but forged in love. My baby would know she mattered, even if nobody else ever showed up. The night after my baby shower disaster, I couldn't sleep. The silence pressed on my chest like a weight, and memories I thought I had buried began to claw their way back into my mind. I remembered birthdays where the cake had my name on it, but all the attention turned to Melissa's new haircut, or her latest trophy, or her bright, impossible smile. Even as a child, I had learned to clap louder for her than anyone else did, just to prove I was happy for her, even when my own candles burned down in front of me. That emptiness I felt sitting alone with cupcakes and ribbons wasn't new. It was a repetition of a lifetime. My mother, Patricia, had always called Melissa her miracle child. She said it so often it became more than a nickname. It was a prophecy, one that dictated the balance of love in our home. Melissa was the miracle, and I was the ordinary child who had to make way for her brilliance. I tried to excel, to carve my own space, but every report card, every drawing, every medal seemed invisible next to my sister's achievements. My father would sometimes pat my shoulder, but even he would soften his gaze when Melissa entered the room, as if she carried sunlight, and I only carried shadows. I can still remember one particular Christmas. I was 8, Melissa was 10. We both ran to the tree in our pajamas, but the pile of gifts beneath the branches was divided in a way I could never forget. Melissa's gifts towered: dolls, dresses, books, a bicycle wrapped in a bow, while mine were small, practical things: socks, a scarf, and a book Melissa had already read. We just knew Melissa would love the bike, Patricia said, her eyes shining. And Jennifer, you've always been such a sensible girl. Sensible. That word was supposed to soothe me, but it branded me instead. The daughter who didn't deserve wonder. I thought adulthood would change things, that motherhood would finally grant me the recognition I had been denied. When I got married to David, part of me secretly believed my parents would finally see me as valuable, as a woman worthy of her own story. But even my wedding day had Melissa written all over it. She wore a shimmering dress that outshone mine, her laughter echoing louder than my vows. I caught my mother wiping tears during Melissa's toast, not mine. The memory cut sharp then, and it cut even sharper now as I realized I had walked straight into the same pattern, only worse. Melissa had a gift, or maybe a curse, of always being the center of gravity. People orbited her, unable to resist her charm, her beauty, her need for attention. And I, foolishly, had accepted my role as background, a silent witness to her constant spotlight. But pregnancy had ignited something fragile in me, a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, the story could change. My child, Emily, would bring everyone together around me for once. I imagined my mother's hands cradling my belly, imagined my in-laws knitting baby clothes, imagined Melissa begrudgingly applauding someone else's joy. I had been wrong. The truth was that I had never stopped craving my mother's approval, like a child still waiting to be called a miracle too. That night, lying awake, I felt a bitter shame wash over me. I was 30 years old, about to become a mother myself, and yet, a part of me still longed for Patricia to look me in the eyes and say, "Jennifer, I am proud of you." But she never had, and after what happened at the baby shower, I realized she probably never would. Instead, she had chosen Melissa once again, even when the choice cut me down to nothing. The next morning, I opened an old shoebox I kept beneath my bed, filled with relics from a childhood I had tried to outgrow. Drawings with gold stars, letters I had written to my mother that were never answered, photos where I stood slightly apart, smiling because the camera told me to. I flipped through them, my hands trembling, and felt the same ache I had felt as a little girl. The ache of being seen but not loved, noticed but never cherished. My tears dripped onto the paper, blurring the colors of a drawing where I had written in clumsy letters, "To Mommy, from Jennifer." It was then that I realized the baby shower wasn't just about one night of abandonment. It was the culmination of a lifetime of being second best. My child had been dishonored before she even arrived, erased by a wedding that wasn't even hers to compete with. The betrayal cut deep, because it wasn't new. It was history repeating itself, the cycle of favoritism replayed louder than ever. And I, once the forgotten daughter, was now the forgotten mother. The roles had shifted, but the pain was identical, a heritage of neglect. I promised myself then that Emily would never inherit this legacy. She would never wonder if she was enough, never wait for applause that didn't come. I pressed my hand against my belly and whispered fiercely, You are my miracle, Emily. Mine. The word cracked in my throat because it was the first time I had allowed myself to claim it. My child would not grow in the shadow of Melissa's brilliance or Patricia's blindness. I would build a different story for her, even if I had to break myself apart to do it. David had always been a man of few words, but lately, his silence had become unbearable. In the early years of our marriage, his quiet nature had felt steady, even comforting, like a rock I could lean on. But during my pregnancy, that rock turned cold, immovable, indifferent. When I tried to share my fears, the cramps at night, the heaviness in my chest, the terror of giving birth, he simply nodded or muttered, "You'll be fine." His voice lacked warmth, like he was reading from a script. And each time, I felt a little more invisible beside the man who was supposed to be my partner. After the baby shower disaster, I wanted him to rage with me, to comfort me, to say, "They were wrong, Jennifer. You and Emily deserve better." But instead, he brushed crumbs off the counter and said I was being too sensitive. The words stung, sharp and dismissive, too sensitive, as if longing for my family's presence, for his support, was an overreaction. I watched his back as he walked into the living room, sat down and turned on the television. The flicker of the screen reflected on his face, more animated by the show than by my heartbreak. At night, lying beside him, I tried to start conversations that mattered. I asked if he was excited about Emily, if he thought she would have his eyes or my smile. He barely looked up from his phone, answering in clipped syllables. "Sure, we'll see." Sometimes he didn't answer at all, lost in messages I couldn't see. The bed between us grew colder, the distance greater, until I felt like a guest in my own marriage. I wondered if he even remembered the woman he had once claimed to love, or if I had simply become another obligation, like paying the bills. I wanted to believe his detachment was stress. Weddings were chaotic, families demanding. Maybe he was just overwhelmed. But the more I tried to justify his silence, the more I realized it wasn't about distraction. It was about choice. He chose to invest his energy in Melissa's wedding, in his mother's endless requests, in everyone else's joy but mine. When he came home, his laughter still carried traces of them, stories he hadn't shared with me but had lived fully in their presence. I was no longer his confidant. I was the woman he slept beside because he had nowhere else to sleep. One evening, I set the dinner table with care, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, a glass of his favorite red wine. I wanted to remind him of us, of the couple we had once been. But he came in late, tossed his jacket on the chair, and barely noticed. "I already ate at Mom's," he said casually, as if it meant nothing. My stomach clenched, not from hunger, but from the realization that I was losing him, not suddenly, but piece by piece. And what made it crueler was that he didn't even fight to keep me. Silence was his weapon, and I was bleeding from wounds I couldn't show. The loneliness of pregnancy magnified every crack in our marriage. My body was changing, my emotions raw, and I needed his arms to hold me, his voice to steady me. Instead, I felt like a widow mourning a man who was still alive but unreachable. Friends asked how we were doing, and I lied, saying he was busy or tired. The truth was that I couldn't remember the last time he looked at me with tenderness. The truth was that I had begun to feel like a single mother long before Emily's birth. One night, unable to contain it anymore, I confronted him. "David, do you even care?" I asked, my voice trembling. He looked up from his phone, confused, as if I were speaking another language. "Of course I care," he said flatly. "You're just emotional. It's the pregnancy." The dismissal sliced deeper than anger would have. Anger at least is passionate, alive. Dismissal is hollow. His words told me everything. He didn't see me. He saw hormones, complaints, noise. I was no longer his wife. I was just the background static in his life. That night I wrote another letter to Emily in my journal. I told her about her father, about the man who had once been kind but now seemed lost to me. I didn't sugarcoat it. I wanted her to know the truth if one day she asked why her mother cried at night. "He should have been our shield, Emily," I wrote with shaking hands. But instead, he turned his back. I don't know if he will ever come back to us, but I promise you, I won't abandon you the way I've been abandoned. The ink blurred where my tears fell, but the vow remained. In the quiet after writing, I realized something that chilled me. I was not just competing with Melissa for my mother's love. I was competing with her for my husband's attention too. His loyalty seemed tangled in invisible threads that pulled him closer to her world, further from mine. And though I didn't yet know the full truth, A whisper in my gut told me the silence between us was hiding something far more dangerous than indifference. Melissa had always known how to command a room. She didn't have to speak loudly. She only had to exist. And suddenly every eye turned to her as if she were the flame, and we were all moths. I used to think it was beauty, her cascading blonde hair, her flawless smile, her laugh that rang like bells. But I've come to realize it was more than that. It was entitlement. Melissa didn't just walk into spaces. She occupied them as though she had a divine right. And the worst part? Everyone accepted it. Even David, my husband, bent unconsciously toward her glow. I can still remember the night at my mother-in-law's house, a week after my baby shower disaster. Patricia had invited us all for dinner. I arrived in a loose dress, my swollen feet aching, my back screaming from the weight of Emily pressing against me. I hoped, foolishly, that someone might ask how I was feeling, might offer a cushion or a kind word. But as soon as Melissa walked in, dazzling in a shimmering gown that belonged on a magazine cover, all attention shifted. My discomfort evaporated from their sight, replaced by coos over her manicure, her dress, her perfect skin. I became invisible again. Melissa thrived on subtle cruelty. She didn't call me names or raise her voice. She used her charm like a blade, slicing me in places only I could feel. "Oh, Jennifer," she said that evening, her smile sweet, but her eyes sharp. "I don't know how you managed to walk around in those maternity dresses. I'd go crazy not being able to wear real clothes." Everyone laughed, even David, who glanced at me but said nothing. My cheeks burned, but I forced a smile, swallowing the lump of humiliation in my throat. Once again, I was the joke at Melissa's banquet of superiority. She knew how to play the victim too, whenever it suited her. If she broke a nail, suddenly the night revolved around her sorrow. If her hair didn't fall just right, she pouted until someone reassured her she was still beautiful, and the family indulged her, every single time. That dinner turned into a wedding planning session, with swatches of fabric spread across the table, talk of floral arrangements, and endless debate over seating charts. My pregnancy, the life kicking inside me, didn't even earn a passing question. I sat there, silent, while my mother-in-law beamed at Melissa like she had already married into royalty. David's loyalty stung the most. He leaned into Melissa's stories, laughed at her jokes, listened intently as she debated ivory versus cream linens. When I tried to join in, offering a weak smile, he brushed me off with a gentle, "Jen, you don't really understand how important this is." The words pierced deeper than a knife. How important this is. As if the growing child in my womb was nothing compared to a party of roses and champagne. I stared at him, realizing that in his eyes, I wasn't the partner at his side anymore. I was the burden he had to endure. Melissa's power didn't come from malice alone. It came from how easily she could bend others to her will. She had my mother's adoration, my husband's attention, my in-laws' devotion. Even strangers seemed to fall at her feet. And every time she soaked up that praise, I shrank further into the shadows. That night, as I watched them all orbit her brilliance, I felt something shift in me. Resentment hardened into anger, anger into something darker. It wasn't just jealousy. It was the recognition that Melissa had stolen everything, and that no one cared. When dessert was served, I excused myself to the bathroom, not because I needed to, but because I couldn't breathe under the weight of their laughter. I locked the door, leaned over the sink, and stared at my reflection. My face was puffy, my eyes rimmed red, my dress stretching awkwardly over my swollen body. I hated myself in that moment, not for being pregnant, but for letting her win, for letting them erase me again. My hands gripped the sink until my knuckles turned white, and I whispered to Emily, "You are worth more than this. We are worth more than this." When I returned, they barely noticed I had left. Melissa was busy twirling fabric samples in her hands, her laughter carrying through the room. David sat beside her, leaning so close their shoulders touched, oblivious to the storm brewing in my chest. My in-laws nodded approvingly, as though the sight of their 2 golden children together was a dream fulfilled. I sat down quietly, spooned dessert onto my plate, and forced it down past the bitterness in my throat. It tasted of sugar and betrayal, the kind that lingers long after the plate is empty. That night, back home, David collapsed into bed without a word. I sat awake in the dark, listening to his breathing, feeling the baby shift inside me, and I realized something terrifying. Melissa didn't need to fight me for my place in this family. She already had it. She was the queen. The throne was hers. And I was just a servant who had dared to believe she could be more. The realization pressed down on me with the weight of years of silence and rejection. For the first time, I wondered if love had ever been real, or if I had simply been a placeholder in a story that was never mine. There are moments when pain stops being sharp and becomes something heavier, something that settles in your bones like lead. That's what I felt the night of the family dinner when I nearly fainted at the table. My hands trembled as I tried to steady the glass of water in front of me, my vision blurring while Emily pressed against my ribs. I thought, just for a moment, that someone would notice, that David would grab my hand and whisper, "Are you okay?" But no one did. All eyes were on Melissa's chipped nail polish, a crisis that had them in stitches of laughter. I sat there, invisible, my body crying for help while their voices drowned me out. The room spun, and I excused myself, clutching the wall for balance as I made my way to the bathroom. I splashed cold water on my face, gripping the sink with both hands, whispering Emily's name like a prayer. "Stay with me. I need you." When I returned, no one asked if I was all right, not even David. He smiled as Melissa told a story about a dress fitting, his laughter loud, his gaze alive. I sat down quietly, my heart breaking into 1,000 shards, realizing that my suffering wasn't even background noise to them. It was nothing at all. That night, on the drive home, the silence between David and me felt unbearable. I wanted to scream, to ask him why he hadn't seen me, why my near collapse didn't matter, but his face was calm, lit by the glow of streetlights, as if nothing had happened. "You're quiet," he said casually, as though he hadn't been absent while I fought to stay upright. My throat tightened with words I couldn't say, because I knew he wouldn't hear them. He had already decided my feelings were exaggerations, hormones, weakness. The walls of his silence towered higher every day, trapping me in the shadows. When we got home, David disappeared into the bedroom while I sat in the living room, surrounded by leftover decorations from the shower that never happened. Balloons half deflated, streamers drooping, a silent reminder of the love I never received. I broke down then, sobs shaking my body as I pressed my hand against my belly. "I'm so sorry, Emily," I whispered. "You deserved better than this family. You deserved joy, not silence. But I promise you, I'll give you the love they denied me." It wasn't just a vow anymore. It was the only anchor I had left in a sea of rejection. That night, for the first time, I began writing letters to my unborn child. In a small leather-bound journal I had bought months ago, I poured out everything: the loneliness, the betrayals, the moments of despair. "One day, Emily," I wrote, "you'll read these pages and know the truth. You'll see that even when the world turned its back, I never did." My hand shook as I wrote, but it was cathartic, a way of bleeding without scars. The ink captured what no one else wanted to hear, that I mattered, that she mattered, even if only to each other. The following days blurred into a pattern of neglect. My in-laws called often, but only to ask about Melissa's wedding details. Patricia stopped by once, bringing magazines of bridal gowns, not baby cribs. Each time I smiled tightly, hiding the storm inside me. But at night, when the house was dark, I wept into my pillow, my body aching with the weight of a love unacknowledged. I began to wonder if this was how my life would always be, erased, diminished, sacrificed on the altar of Melissa's perfection. And that thought terrified me more than the pain itself. Then came the moment that truly broke me. We were at another family gathering, and I tried to share the news that Emily had kicked for the first time in a strong, steady rhythm. My voice trembled with excitement, but before I could finish, Melissa interrupted with a shriek. She had found the perfect pair of wedding shoes. The room erupted in cheers, my words swallowed by their joy. David didn't even glance my way. I froze, the smile dying on my lips, the miracle of my daughter's movement lost in the noise of leather heels. That was the instant I understood. They would never choose me. Back home, I didn't cry. Instead, a strange calm settled over me, colder than grief, sharper than rage. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the journal I had filled with promises to Emily. The ink glistened in the lamplight, each word a testament to the love I was denied. And for the first time, I felt something grow inside me that wasn't despair. It was strength, bitter, raw, but unshakable. If no one else would fight for me, I would fight for myself and my child. The breaking point wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous. I crawled into bed beside David, who was already asleep, his breathing steady, his body turned away from mine. I watched him for a long time, searching for traces of the man I had once loved, the man who had once whispered promises under starlit skies. But all I saw was distance, betrayal waiting to be unveiled. I placed my hand over my belly and whispered into the dark, "We are enough, Emily, with or without them, especially without them." And for the first time in months, my tears didn't taste of defeat, they tasted of defiance. I had always known my mother Patricia carried secrets. She wore them like perfume, invisible, but their presence lingered in every room she entered. Growing up, I sensed there were stories she never told, chapters she had ripped out of her life and hidden away, but I never imagined how much those secrets had shaped me. It wasn't until I stumbled across an old box in the attic, tucked beneath stacks of forgotten holiday decorations, that the truth finally found me. Dust clung to the edges, the cardboard sagging with age, as though time itself had tried to bury it. Inside the box were relics of a woman I barely recognized, faded photographs of a young Patricia, journals bound in cracked leather, a bundle of letters tied with ribbon. My hands trembled as I pulled out the top journal, its pages yellowed but still strong. The scent of old ink and paper hit me like a wave, carrying whispers from decades past. I sat cross-legged on the floor, my belly heavy with Emily's weight, and began to read. With each page, my breath grew shallow, my heart pounding with the rhythm of a story I wasn't supposed to know. The entries started innocently enough, notes about school, friendships, fleeting romances. But then, midway through the journal, the handwriting changed. It grew desperate, jagged, filled with raw pain. Patricia was writing about a pregnancy. My mother had been pregnant long before she married my father. She wrote about the shame, the fear, the way her own parents had turned their backs on her. She was young, alone, and terrified. I read with wide eyes, my chest tightening with each sentence, until I found the entry that shattered me completely. They took her away. I wasn't strong enough to keep her. My first daughter. My miracle gone. I froze, staring at those words as if they had been written for me, as if the ink bled directly into my veins. My mother had given up a child for adoption, a child I never knew existed, and suddenly, everything made sense. Her obsession with Melissa, her constant comparisons, her coldness toward me. I wasn't the replacement daughter. I was the reminder of what she had lost. To love me would mean reopening the wound of abandonment. So instead, she poured every ounce of affection into Melissa, the one who had never reminded her of failure. The truth cut deeper than any insult she had ever thrown my way. As I flipped further, tears blurred the words. Patricia wrote about her guilt, about how Melissa was the second chance she could never waste. She promised herself that Melissa would never feel the neglect her first daughter endured. And there it was, the answer I had been searching for my whole life. Why I was always invisible. Why my achievements were ignored. Why my very existence seemed to irritate her. I was not Melissa, and I was not the lost child. I was the in-between, the daughter who carried the weight of her regret without ever being asked. I was the shadow of her shame. I pressed my hand against my belly, whispering to Emily as if she could understand. "Do you see now, my love? We were never the problem. We were just the reminder." My tears dripped onto the fragile pages, the ink smudging under the weight of my grief. But beneath the sorrow, something else stirred. Anger. Anger at Patricia for never telling me, for making me live in a lie where love was conditional and always just out of reach. Anger for allowing me to believe I was less, when the truth was that her own brokenness had shaped everything. The anger burned hot, and for once, I didn't try to put it out. That night, I sat alone in the living room with the journal spread open across my lap. The lamp cast a soft glow on the words, illuminating my mother's deepest confessions. I thought about confronting her, about demanding answers, but the idea filled me with dread. Patricia had built her entire identity on secrecy and control. Tearing that apart would be like pulling the ground out from under both of us. And yet, I couldn't unknow what I had learned. The knowledge lived inside me now, changing the way I saw her, changing the way I saw myself. Nothing between us would ever be the same. For the first time in my life, I pitied Patricia. Beneath her sharp tongue and endless favoritism, she was a woman haunted by a child she had lost, a wound that never healed. But pity did not erase the damage she had done to me. If anything, it sharpened it. Because instead of confronting her own grief, She had redirected it into me, crushing me beneath the weight of her silence. And as I thought of Melissa, adored, celebrated, untouched by this ghost, I realized she too was living a lie, unaware of the sister she had replaced, the crack she had been placed into like plaster hiding a fracture. I closed the journal, my hands trembling, and placed it back into the box, but I knew I couldn't put the truth away. It would live inside me now, an echo that changed the way I would raise Emily. I swore, right there in the quiet of the attic, that my daughter would never carry my shame, my regrets, or my ghosts. She would be loved for who she was, not for what she represented. And as I blew out the lamp and walked back to bed, I realized something chilling. Secrets don't just stay buried. They bleed through generations, unless someone dares to break the cycle. That someone would be me. The morning after uncovering my mother's secret, I woke with swollen eyes and a chest that felt hollow, but I told myself I was stronger now. Emily shifted gently inside me, a reminder that my future was not bound by my mother's shadows. Yet, as I stepped into the kitchen, I noticed something strange. David's phone lit up with a message before he quickly turned it face down, his movements too sharp, too defensive. My heart stuttered. I had lived with this man for years. I knew his rhythms, his habits. This wasn't normal, and though I wanted to dismiss it as paranoia born of my discoveries, something inside whispered that I shouldn't. Later that day, Melissa stopped by. Her presence always came with a wave of tension, but this time it was different. She seemed nervous, her laugh too loud, her eyes darting toward David every chance she got. They spoke quietly in the corner while I prepared tea, their voices low and hushed, carrying just enough tone to make me feel excluded. A heavy knot formed in my stomach. I stirred sugar into the cup, my hand trembling as their whispers floated like ghosts around me. For years, I had been ignored and sidelined, but this felt worse. This felt like a secret being held directly against me. That evening, after Melissa left, I tried to confront David gently. I asked him what they had been talking about, hoping his response would ease my anxiety. Instead, he brushed it off, saying Melissa was just stressed with wedding plans. But I saw the flicker in his eyes, that quick shift of pupils that only appears when someone is lying. "Don't overthink it, Jen," he said, kissing my cheek too quickly. It was a dismissal, not affection. And for the first time, I felt like a stranger in my own marriage, a guest being pacified rather than a partner being confided in. The unease grew in the days that followed. David started coming home later, his excuses flimsy and repetitive. "Traffic," he said. "Late meeting," he added, but I could smell faint traces of perfume that wasn't mine on his shirt, lingering like poison. I wanted to scream, to demand the truth, but fear choked me. What if my suspicions were right? What if, on top of my mother's favoritism, I was also living in the shadow of betrayal from the man I trusted most? I pressed my hands against my belly at night, whispering promises to Emily that I would protect her no matter what, even if it meant breaking. One afternoon, as I sorted laundry, I found a folded note in David's jeans pocket. My pulse quickened as I smoothed it open, my hands clammy with dread. It wasn't long, just a scribble in Melissa's handwriting. "Tonight, same place. Don't let her know." My knees buckled, and I sank onto the floor, the note shaking in my grasp. My mind spiraled into chaos. It couldn't be what I thought. It had to be something else, something innocent, something explainable. But deep down, I already knew the truth was darker, and denial was the only thread keeping me from collapsing completely. I confronted Melissa the next day, unable to hold it in. She laughed when I showed her the note, her voice dripping with condescension. "Jennifer, you're so dramatic. It's about a surprise for you, obviously. Why ruin everything by snooping?" She patted my arm like I was a child and walked away, leaving me in a haze of humiliation. But her eyes betrayed her. They gleamed with something sharper than mockery, triumph, and I knew then that she was lying. The note wasn't about me. It was about them. It was about something they didn't want me to see. That night, I lay awake listening to David breathe beside me, his chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. I stared into the darkness, my body rigid with fury and fear. Every touch now felt foreign, every kiss laced with suspicion. I wanted to shake him awake and demand answers, but instead I turned to my side, curling around my unborn child. In the silence of the room, I realized that betrayal doesn't always announce itself with fireworks. Sometimes it creeps in quietly, through whispered conversations and hurried phone calls, until it rots the foundation of everything you thought was safe. The next morning, I made a decision. If David and Melissa thought they could conspire in shadows, then I would step into those shadows too. I began watching more closely, memorizing their glances, noting the excuses, tracking the lies. It wasn't paranoia anymore. It was preparation. I felt like a detective in my own life, gathering evidence for a trial I hadn't yet decided to hold. And with every small detail, my heart hardened. I was done being the forgotten daughter, the overlooked wife. If they were hiding something, I would uncover it, no matter how much it hurt me in the end. Still, as determined as I was, fear never left me. Because deep in my bones, I sensed that what I was about to discover wouldn't just break my heart, it would unravel everything I thought I knew about love, family, and loyalty. And once that thread was pulled, there would be no way to weave my life back together again. I kissed Emily goodnight inside my womb, whispering, "Hold on, my love. Mama is about to walk into a storm." The day it happened began like any other, deceptively ordinary. I went to the doctor for a routine checkup, holding Emily's ultrasound photo tightly in my purse as if it were my shield. The doctor said she was strong, healthy, and growing well. I should have been glowing with joy, but instead a dark weight pressed against my chest, a whisper that something terrible was about to unravel. I drove home slower than usual, prolonging the silence, afraid of what might greet me when I stepped back into my house. That fear wasn't irrational anymore. It was instinct, warning me of a truth I had been dancing around for too long. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed something strange. Melissa's car was parked a few houses down, partially hidden behind a hedge. My first reaction was confusion. Why would she be here in the middle of the day, when she had never once cared to check in on me during my pregnancy? My second reaction was dread, a sharp pang that twisted my gut and made it hard to breathe. The curtains in the living room were drawn, something David never did during the day. My hands trembled as I reached for the keys. For a moment, I thought about turning the car around and driving away, pretending none of this was happening. But I knew I couldn't. Not anymore. I walked to the front door with leaden feet, each step echoing like a drumbeat in my ears. The house was too quiet, unnaturally still, until I heard it. A muffled laugh, soft but unmistakable, drifting from upstairs. Melissa's laugh. My stomach lurched violently, bile rising in my throat. I clutched the banister for support as my body wavered between rage and collapse. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to spare myself the final confirmation. But another voice, fierce and broken, urged me forward. I needed to know. I deserved to know. And Emily deserved a mother who didn't live inside lies. When I pushed open our bedroom door, time stopped. David was there, his shirt undone. Melissa lying beside him in my bed, our bed, with the sheets tangled around her like a crown of victory. For a moment, the world went silent. Except for the violent pounding of my heart, Melissa didn't look surprised. In fact, she smiled, a slow, venomous curl of her lips, as if she had been waiting for this moment all along. David's face, pale and stunned, shifted between guilt and fear, but his silence was the loudest confession of all. My knees buckled, and I gripped the doorframe, gasping as if the air itself had betrayed me too. "Jennifer, wait. It's not what you think," David began, his voice shaky, pathetic. But the sight before me screamed louder than any words. I staggered back, pressing my hands against my belly as though Emily could shield me from the shards piercing my heart. Melissa stretched lazily, unashamed, her eyes glinting with triumph. "You should have expected this," she whispered, as if twisting the knife deeper. The cruelty in her tone stole the ground from beneath me. My sister-in-law, the woman my family adored, had been plotting not just to outshine me but to destroy me completely. And David, the man I trusted, had handed her the weapon. The room spun around me. Memories of our vows, our laughter, the nights we whispered about our dreams. All of it crumbled in that instant. I wanted to scream until the walls shattered, but instead a strange calm washed over me, the kind that comes right before a storm. I looked at David, really looked at him, and realized I didn't recognize the man standing there. He was a stranger who had built a home inside my life only to burn it down from within. "You've killed us," I whispered, my voice shaking but steady enough to make his face collapse into despair. "Whatever we were, it's gone." I ran out before he could follow, my vision blurred with tears, the world outside a distorted haze. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to get away, to breathe air that wasn't tainted by their betrayal. My body trembled with every step. but Emily's gentle kick anchored me. She was still there, still alive, still mine, and for her, I would survive this hell. I drove aimlessly for hours, the streets unfamiliar, the city a blur of lights and shadows. My hands clutched the steering wheel until they ached, my heart pounding in sync with the echoes of Melissa's mocking smile. When I finally stopped the car, I was parked by the river, its dark waters reflecting the night sky. I sat there for a long time, gripping my belly, sobbing until no tears remained. My world had collapsed in a single afternoon, yet within me, life was growing stronger every day. And in that paradox, I found a strange, fragile power. They could take my trust, my dignity, even my home, but they could not take Emily. She was my blood, my hope, my redemption. As the wind howled through the open window, I swore an oath I had never spoken before. I would not be their victim. I would not break. I returned home later that night, the house still and silent. David was waiting, his eyes swollen, his lips trembling with apologies I no longer wanted to hear. I walked past him without a word, into the guest room, locking the door behind me. For the first time in our marriage, the walls between us were real, tangible. I curled up on the narrow bed, whispering promises to Emily that she would never grow up believing betrayal was normal, that she would know her worth. But deep inside, a darker thought began to form, a question that chilled me to the bone. If my family had already abandoned me, and David had destroyed me, what else was left for them to take? The morning after discovering David and Melissa's betrayal, I woke with a new resolve. My body ached from the shock, my heart still bruised, but something inside me had shifted. I was no longer the woman who waited silently for love, the one who bent under others' approval. Emily was growing inside me, a living reminder that I carried the future in my arms, and for her, I would rise. I moved quietly through the house, packing a small bag with essentials, clothes, my journal, the ultrasound photos, the tangible proof that my life belonged to me and my daughter alone. I left a note on the kitchen counter, concise but deliberate. I need space to think. I will not be harmed, and neither will Emily. Do not follow. There was fear in writing it, yes, but also a surge of defiance I hadn't felt in years. For so long, I had endured invisibility, manipulation, betrayal. Now, every step I took was a reclamation of my own worth. Driving away from the house that had become a cage, I felt the first spark of freedom. The city passed by in a blur of lights and shadows, each passing street a reminder that my life was still mine to define. I found refuge in a small rented apartment, modest but safe, where no one could reach me without my permission. I unpacked slowly, surrounding myself with Emily's presence, tiny clothes folded neatly, the journal that held my vows to her, and a small mobile I had bought for her crib. As I arranged these things, the weight of what had happened began to settle, transforming from raw pain into strategic clarity. I wasn't just escaping, I was preparing. Every decision from this point forward would be for Emily and me, not for anyone who had tried to diminish our existence. I spent hours thinking, writing, planning. I documented everything. David's lies, Melissa's manipulations, Patricia's favoritism, every slight, every betrayal. The journal became my arsenal, a detailed account that no one could dispute. Anger simmered beneath my pen, but I channeled it into clarity, each word a step toward reclaiming power. I realized that strength wasn't vengeance alone. Strength was preparation, foresight, and the unshakable knowledge that I would never allow anyone to control me or my daughter again. Late at night, I practiced standing tall in the mirror. My reflection stared back at me, a woman both broken and unbreakable. The swelling of my belly was a crown of sorts, proof that I could create life in a world that had tried to destroy me. I whispered affirmations to Emily, promising her a life filled with love and protection. "We are enough, my love," I said, pressing my hand to my stomach. "We will rise above their cruelty, above their lies. They cannot touch us anymore." The words tasted like fire, burning away the residue of fear that had once kept me silent. Days turned into weeks, and I began reclaiming small pieces of my independence. I opened a bank account in my name, started reconnecting with a few friends who had sensed my pain, and researched legal protections for myself and Emily. Each step, no matter how small, reinforced a truth I had long ignored. I was capable of surviving. I had been invisible to my family, dismissed by my husband, and yet here I was, standing on the edge of transformation, my mind sharper, my resolve stronger than it had ever been. I didn't sleep much, but in the quiet hours, I felt Emily move, her tiny kicks reminding me that I was not alone. The betrayal I had endured had forged a bond with my child even before her birth, one that David and Melissa could never sever. I began planning for a future where Emily would never know the humiliation, the neglect, or the favoritism that had defined my life. I would teach her to love herself fiercely, to trust wisely, and to never allow anyone to diminish her light. In those quiet nights, my grief transformed into purpose. Occasionally, I peeked at the house from a distance, watching David and Melissa go about their lives, laughing as if nothing had happened. My chest tightened, but not with despair, with focus. I no longer needed their approval, their love, or even their acknowledgement. I was building a fortress around Emily and me, brick by brick, and it was unshakable. Their world, once my cage, now existed outside the walls I had constructed. And inside, I was finally free to breathe, to think, to plan my future on my terms. By the time I felt ready to act, I knew it would be decisive. This wasn't about revenge alone. It was about justice, about reclaiming what had been stolen. I would confront them, expose the betrayals, and ensure that Emily grew up surrounded by love, not shadows. I had survived invisibility, betrayal, and humiliation, and now I would emerge, not just as a victim, but as a mother, a protector, and a force that neither David, Melissa, nor Patricia could ever ignore. The fire inside me burned brighter than fear, and for the first time in years, I felt unstoppable. The day I returned to the house, I felt an unfamiliar clarity, a calm resolve that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with purpose. I stepped inside, my steps firm, my eyes scanning the familiar rooms that had once been battlegrounds of betrayal. David looked up from the couch, surprise flashing across his face, but he said nothing. Melissa froze mid-laugh, her previous confidence faltering under the weight of my presence. I held Emily close, feeling her heartbeat through the baby bump, and knew in that instant that nothing they could say or do would touch the bond we shared. I began with David. My voice was steady, each word measured, each accusation precise. I told him I knew everything, the secret rendezvous, the lies, the betrayal that had poisoned our marriage. I listed the proofs I had collected, the notes, the whispers I had documented, the inconsistencies I had tracked. He tried to interject, stammering excuses, but I cut him off calmly. There was no pleading in my tone, only authority. For the first time in years, I felt the power of truth as a shield, a force that could no longer be denied or silenced. David's gaze fell to the floor, and for the first time, I saw fear there. Melissa, meanwhile, tried to charm her way out, her laugh hollow, her golden mask cracking. I walked slowly toward her, letting each word land like a strike. I told her I had known about her manipulation from the beginning, about the way she had poisoned my in-laws' hearts, how she had stolen affection, admiration, and a place that never belonged to her. She flinched at my precision, realizing for the first time that her control had limits. I reminded her that her cruelty had consequences, and for the first time, she could not charm, bribe, or intimidate her way out of the truth. Then came Patricia. She appeared at the door, her face pale, a mixture of guilt and shock flickering across her features. I held the journal up, the pages worn but potent, and read aloud fragments of her past confessions, the child she had given away, the favoritism that had skewed my life, the silent manipulations that had shaped Melissa into her golden daughter. Patricia's tears fell freely, but they were too late. Words cannot undo years of neglect and betrayal. She could explain, she could apologize, but she could never reclaim what she had lost. And I didn't need her approval anymore. I didn't shout. I didn't beg. I simply told them that the family they had tried to mold around Melissa's perfection no longer controlled me. I had rebuilt myself from the ashes of their neglect and betrayal, and I was taking Emily and me into a future they could no longer dictate. My strength was not a weapon. It was a declaration. Every step, every breath, every decision belonged to us now. I would not be diminished, erased, or ignored. For the first time, I felt the full weight of my autonomy, and it was exhilarating, terrifying, and liberating all at once. David tried to argue, tried to claim he could make amends, but I shook my head. "You don't get to decide how we move forward," I said. "Your betrayal is yours to carry. Emily and I will not carry it for you." The silence that followed was heavy, a tangible wall between the past and the new life I was creating. Melissa slumped into a chair, defeated in a way I had never thought I would see. She had always been untouchable, but in this moment, her brilliance no longer blinded anyone. I was finally seen, finally real, finally in control. I spent the rest of the day cleaning out their influence from our lives. Boxes of gifts and letters that carried hidden malice were discarded. Photographs that once made me feel inferior were taken down and replaced with images of hope, of family we chose rather than inherited. Every action, no matter how small, was a reclaiming of space, physical, emotional, and spiritual. Emily was already a part of that reclamation, and I spoke to her as I sorted, whispering promises of love, protection, and honesty. In my heart, I knew this was only the beginning of our healing. By nightfall, the house felt different, even though the people within it had not changed. I had changed. The walls no longer seemed oppressive, the echoes of Melissa's laughter no longer haunting. I had faced the truth, endured betrayal, and emerged stronger. And as I lay in the quiet of the newly reclaimed space, I felt Emily shift inside me, a small, potent reminder that life continues, even in the aftermath of devastation. I traced her tiny movements through my belly, promising her that she would know only love, not the shadows of manipulation or cruelty. The next morning, I left the house with Emily's nursery fully prepared, a sanctuary built from hope rather than fear. David stayed behind, silently contending with his guilt, and Melissa retreated to her golden facade, no longer threatening, no longer in control. Patricia remained, sorrowful, but distant, a specter of the past. And I drove away, the sun rising ahead of me, illuminating a path I had carved with resilience, courage, and fierce love. For the first time, the world felt wide, safe, and ours to inhabit. In the car, I whispered softly to Emily, "This is our life, my love. Nothing they can do, no betrayal, no neglect, can take away what we have. You and I, we are enough, we are unstoppable, and we will rise, always." Her gentle kicks were my affirmation, her presence a bond stronger than any chain they had ever tried to place around me. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that no one, not my mother, not David, not Melissa, could ever break us. We were whole, we were free, and the future belonged solely to us.